A Rabbinic Anthology, selected with an introduction by C.G. Montefiore and H.Loewe. The extracts given will sometimes be quite short, but sometimes they must be fairly long. Settings as well as jewels for the settings may be very characteristic, and for the same reason I shall include some extracts which are quaint or odd, rather than beautiful or profound. For in these, to us, quaint and odd sayings and stories, much which is of the true rabbinic spirit may be revealed. Noble ethics may sometimes take queer forms or be oddly expressed. In all these ways, and not least by indicating what is frequent and what is exceptional, I must try to give a collection of flowers and yet to suggest a true and not a false picture of the rabbinic religion as a whole. One, and to the rabbis, the most important aspect of their religion, their most earnest occupation, and I should fancy their chiefest delight, has to be omitted entirely from this anthology. Halakha and Haggadah, we are told, together constitute rabbinic religion and literature. The interpretations of the Pentateuchal law, the enormous elaborations of it, the immense additions to it, the interminable discussions, arguments, disputations, and counter-arguments. All this is halakha. Upon halakha, all the regulated and ordered intelligence of the rabbis was spent. All their logic and training. Haggadah was their relaxation and amusement. In Haggadah, their fancy and imagination found its occupation. Then, too, their sermons to the congregation, their moral and religious teachings, in our modern sense, the reports and records of all these are Haggadah. So, too, their prayers, though not their elaborate rules about prayer, all their vagrant and unsystematic thought and fancy about God and the relations between God and Israel, all that we read of their homiletic, imaginative, uncircumscribed, and unregulated interpretation of Scripture on its non-legal side is Haggadah. We find it in a turgid and turbid mass, for the most part a regular, or rather an irregular, jumble and jungle, without artistry or plan. Halakha and Haggadah are sometimes mixed together, so that the latter interpenetrates the former. Yet in this book, Halakha, with the endless rules and discussions about civil and criminal law, about clean and unclean, about sexual life and women's impurities, about Sabbaths and festivals, must be entirely omitted. What I draw upon is almost exclusively Haggadah, with all its freedom and its exaggerations, its variety, its limitations, and its disorder, with all its nobilities and absurdities, its excellences and its defects. Chapter 16, page CIV. Oh, still an introduction. This total omission of Halakha from my book, although unavoidable, must, I fear, tend to give a false, because one-sided impression of the rabbinic religion, and more certainly of rabbinic life. For all these legal discussions, all this study of the law, all these elaborations and minutiae were, to the rabbis, the breath of their nostrils, their greatest joy and their finest portion of their lives, and yet to most of us, it has almost all become distant and obsolete. To most of us, the larger part of it seems a waste of mental energy and of time. If a very big percentage of the halakhic portion of the rabbinic literature were destroyed, archaeology, comparative jurisprudence, and so on would be the poorer, but our modern religious life would hardly be affected. A gulf separates us from the rabbis, and this gulf has to be recognized. Their most absorbing interests were not ours. We have also to confess that religion meant and was more to them than to us. God was nearer to them in more senses than one, and heaven and hell were more definite and influencing realities. Here, too, the rabbis may be compared with the men of the medieval world. See Captain D. Ogg and Taylor's Great Events in History, 1934, page 335. In the past, religion was an overwhelming element in human existence. Today, when international and economic problems engross the attention of mankind, there is a toleration of creeds coupled with considerable indifference. Gentlemen, now keep the religious views to themselves, and celestial probabilities have been displaced by earthly realities. How is the Haggadic portion of the huge rabbinic literature to be described and judged? It is certainly not first-class literature, though it contains many fine and notable things. It is without form or artistry. The greater part of it is the literature, not of a caste, but of a small set of professional people, of rabbis and their disciples, and of students. It is true that the rabbis were also preachers, yet it seems to me that a large part of what has been preserved and written down of Haggadic literature must have been necessarily intended not for the populace, but for the inner and smaller circles of students and disciples, and for the delectation of the rabbis themselves. Yet they did not by any means lose touch with the community. They were recruited from the people and from all classes. Rich and poor were among them, craftsmen, traders, landowners. After the destruction of the temple and after the Hadrianic revolt, all the Jews drew together, learned and unlearned alike. All were Israelites, all felt themselves God's chosen people and children. All seemed nearer and dearer to him than any other folk on earth. All were partners in a common misfortune. All were heirs to a common glory. The rabbis cared for the poor and managed the affairs of the community. Yet they were inclined to look on everything which took them away from the house of study as a duty rather than a joy.